My name is Ashley Everhart again, and this is my second presentation. This one is on dioxins, and I have started off with a quote. It says, "This material is exceptionally toxic. It has a tremendous potential for producing chloracne and systematic injury." And that is said by a scientist named Rowe, and he is referring to dioxin in the form of Agent Orange, which was well known in Vietnam and being used as a device from the U.S. that we sprayed over Vietnam. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. I've started out with a little bit of did you know about dioxins. This is the dioxin compound, and dioxins themselves are a whole group of things. It's not just one. However, when we refer to it mostly, it is referred to as this one, and we'll talk about him later, but that's what he looks like. Did you know dioxins are the key component in Agent Orange? The first EPA report of Agent Orange was actually September 1985, and the most current report was done in May 2010, and that's just a draft copy. It's not a full-on report. It's just continuing on what they've done from 1985. Dioxins were also found at Love Canal in New York. They damage the immune and nervous system. They cause cancer in long-term exposure, and they are released during forest fires, which is one thing that I did not know, but I found really interesting. So I included that there's a picture of the release of dioxin during forest fires, and this is a picture of them spraying Agent Orange in Vietnam during the war. And I have a clip on this, and I don't want it to transfer to my next slide, so I'm going to run back to my computer, click it, and then I'll be back.
For nearly 10 years, the U.S. sprayed more than 19 million gallons of Agent Orange, which contains the lethal chemical dioxin, on Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. Not just jungles were sprayed. 3,181 villages and as many as 4 million people were also directly sprayed. This spraying continued long after the Vietnamese and American doctors began reporting the destructive effects on humans, and for nearly 2 years after the American scientists proved the connection to birth defects. And it wasn't just the infamous Agent Orange that was used. The Vietnamese also had to suffer Agent White, Agent Purple, Agent Pink, Agent Blue, and Agent Green. A virtual rainbow of death was rained down upon the Vietnamese. Rice was the specialty of Agent Blue, because the sturdy Vietnamese rice proved resistant to the many other herbicides. The purpose was to deny the Vietnamese food as well as the protection of the jungle from U.S. air assaults. This poison was produced by many major American corporations, including Dow, Monsanto, and Uniroyal. During the war, there were many protests against its production in the U.S. I am today proud to say that I went to jail in 1970 for my part in a sit-in against Dow. While hundreds of millions have been paid to the U.S. and other victims of Agent Orange by the U.S. government and the companies that made it, not one penny in compensation has been paid to the main victims of these war crimes, the Vietnamese. When the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld visited Vietnam in 2006, he again refused to consider the Vietnamese application for compensation. Although he did demand they do more to find the last 40-year-old remains of American MIAs. The Vietnamese still have more than 300,000 MIAs of their own, not to mention thousands of little victims of Agent Orange born since the war. I don't think they have the time.
Let me exit my full screen. That is obviously a very sad video. Just a second. Keep going.
American forces in Vietnam sprayed 18 million liters of chemicals.
But as I was saying, obviously that was a very sad video, and the effects of dioxin are very detrimental to society and to those who are exposed to it, as you saw in the many birth defects of those who are in Vietnam.
For nearly 10
Now
years,
the
the
link
U.S.
works.
sprayed more
It
than
didn't work
19 million
before,
gallons
so
of
I'm just going to get back to the slideshow one more time. I apologize. All right, there we go. So dioxins in a nutshell. This is the compound that I was talking about earlier, TCDD, and that's what it looks like with the benzene rings. Industrial waste product is what dioxins are, and that is from incineration as well as reusing pretty much old oil and processing that oil. It is a synthetic toxin and it bioaccumulates, which I'm also going to discuss more in depth later. But essentially, it goes through the system, starting with feed and then moving to animals and moving to people, and just keeps on accumulating. And moms, I have watch out, because moms can actually transfer their dioxin intake to their children through pregnancy as well as breastfeeding in the milk. This is just the common process of how dioxin goes from the industrial processes, erosion runoff, combustion and direct discharge, up into the atmosphere or through the water supply, going to fish, and then depositing into fields and seeds, and then eventually getting into our food supply. Examples of dioxin poisoning, I've already shown a clip about birth defects. There's one picture. People aren't just the only ones that have these birth defects. Obviously it can get put into the water, and this is a really nasty looking fish because of dioxin. It can also affect people through chloracne, and this is the president of Ukraine, and a few years ago, 2004, he was actually poisoned by someone, and this was the outcome. He then had reconstructive surgery and looks much better now, looks different, but his face he completely regrafted after he received dioxin poisoning because of some scandal. Danger, watch out. Common ways that dioxins are released into the environment: burn barrels that a lot of people have outside their homes, especially in rural Indiana. I know, especially in the summertime, bonfires, you just throw the trash into the campfire. Same concept with the burn barrel. So those are bad news. Paper making, actually when the pulp, the wood pulp, is bleached, that chlorine bleach releases dioxins. PVC pipe, polyvinyl chloride, in the making of that, dioxins are released. Herbicides and pesticides, obviously, and meat bioaccumulation, which I have another picture, I think, later that kind of shows that more. But processing, going from the bottom of the food chain all the way up, and us eventually eating the meat and consuming all of those dioxins. This is a picture of something called a toxic trade, and I found a lot of editorials that were in German, I wish I spoke German, about this, and obviously it was a huge deal. There were tons of news articles over it, and it started with a company who manufactures biofuel from spent cooking fats. So again, those old cooking oils, then they create mixed fats, and it produces it, and then it goes to the next company who buys the fats and sells them on, and then it went to the next company who uses the fats to produce feed, and then that feed was fed to the animals, and the animals were poisoned, and then it got to the people. And it was kind of like the listeria outbreak a few weeks ago with cantaloupes, except times 100 with German eggs and also with pork products. And complete cities refused to buy any eggs, and detrimental to the farmers without them even knowing the whole backstory and not being aware that their feed was contaminated by dioxins, and therefore they were poisoning the entire population. So that was quite an ordeal. Use and regulation. The number one way we have dioxins is industrial waste, through incineration and the processing of old oils again. Also through farming, herbicides and insecticides, pesticides, as well as cigarettes. Cigarettes are nasty, don't smoke. But I thought this ad was clever, that it is government approved, because all of these things we use and we still have, and yet we know it can be detrimental to our health. The three parts of the sides, on the outsides, are chlorinated pesticides, chlorine bleached paper, and chlorine contaminated additives such as those in cigarettes. It is regulated by the EPA, and more specifically the National Center for Environmental Assessment. And the last report, as I said, was May 2010. Let me see if this works. Yes, it did. And this was the draft copy that happened in May 2010 for, more specifically, the TCDD Exposure and Human Health Reassessment. I have this link at the end if you want to go there. Okay. I'm going to hit the graph first and then we'll go to the words. This is just a chart showing the North American daily intake of dioxins, and most of it obviously comes from beef, and then we also have dairy, so it accumulates again in the fatty parts, so fatty milks, fatty dairy products, and fatty parts of the cow. And then chicken, pork, and fish are all 7.8 and higher, and then we have egg, inhalation, breathing it in, soil ingestion, and then water ingestion is pretty much nilch, nothing. The reason for that is the EPA says that dioxins are hydrophobic, apologize for that, which means that they are water-fearing, and then they're also lipophilic, which are fat-loving. And that explains, obviously, why it's found in beef and dairy and fatty products as opposed to water or healthy food products. The EPA report literally said that the best way to not have dioxin poisoning or be exposed to dioxins is to become a vegan. So if you don't want it, I guess you have to become a vegan. Personally, I would rather know what I'm dying of and enjoy my bacon and cheeseburgers. But also it says dioxin works its way to the top of the food chain. So any way you cut it, you have dioxins in your body, I'm sure, and they're going to be there as long as you're not exposed to large amounts. You're not going to die. Don't become vegan unless you really want to. And these are my sources. Again, I will send a copy to Jenny, and if any of you would like more information on dioxins, it's also found in our textbook. So I hope you enjoyed the second presentation. Have a great class.